Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to aidbees. We are back again with a very exciting podcast. It's International Literacy Day on the 8th of September, and we are here discussing the challenges and the milestones of combating illiteracy today. And with us, we have a very esteemed panel today. We have Ma'am Rekha Shahani with us. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to aidbees.
Namaskar.
And we have Ma'am Madhulika Banerjee joining us from Delhi. Welcome, ma'am. We welcome you to aidbees. Before moving on to the questions and discussions, I would like to quickly introduce our panel. Ms. Rekha Shahani is the Diplomatic Secretary of the Early Childhood Association and APER. She's an educator and change maker with over an experience of 30 plus years, and she works with the police and schools, etc., to implement change-making initiatives. She has been the principal of Kamla High School, Bombay, for more than 12 years, from 2003 to 2015. She's also been a teacher in Kamla High School from 1990s onwards. She was instrumental in setting up various school linking programs across UK and other countries, and she's also credited for the longest partnership of any Indian school for more than 14 years with the government of UK. So we can surely say that Rekha ma'am has transformed literacy and education for all of us. We welcome you.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Thank you.
We also have Madhulika Banerjee with us. She is a professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Delhi. With more than 30 years of experience as a researcher, as a writer, and as a professor, she brings to us a knowledge system over political theories, political understanding, as she's been preparing the future of this country since so many years. It's quite impressive and quite motivating. Madhulika ma'am has a book published on her name on the knowledge system that Ayurveda gives to us. It's published by Black Swan India, and she's a graduate from the Lady Shri Ram College in economics as well. And she's published multiple articles, reports, and essays on the political and social ecosystem. Madhulika ma'am, welcome to aidbees, and we welcome you with gratitude.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be part of this podcast. Yeah.
Thank you. It'd be great if we could all be on unmute. I mean, it's better for the discussion, I feel. Moving on.
Okay.
Yeah. Moving on with the questions. I think let's quickly start up with the idea of what we are here to discuss. We are here to discuss challenges and milestones with regards to combating illiteracy in India. Now, literacy is surely a separate concept from education because it starts from the foundational learning. It starts from foundational aspects of learning and growing up as an individual, right? We'll start with Rekha ma'am. Ma'am, how do you see the growing importance of literacy in the contemporary society? Do you think it indicates a specific notion?
So we have been celebrating the World Literacy Day since the 60s. And my thoughts and opinions are my personal. So what I feel as an educationist, as an individual of my country and the world at large, is that we are still talking about the challenges. We are still talking about what is not, but very few of us are really focusing on what should be or what can be, at this moment. And when I was talking that we are celebrating since the 60s, I think it was 1966 when we celebrated the first time the World Literacy Day. I don't think things have changed much, not only in my country, but overall, we are still talking about what should be there. And with the increase in population, personally, I see all the researches showing that the number of illiterate people is also growing. So the challenges, which we'll be talking about later, is something to think about. But importance is definitely being given by individuals, by NGOs, by corporate sector, by the government, not only in our country, but all over, about how literacy should be increased and how we can do it. So from where I see it, I think public-private partnership has increased over the period of time, and that has helped us. in bringing up the literacy rate, but we have a long, long way to go to move about in the right direction to get even the basic minimum literacy rate to reach to where we want it.
Madhulika ma'am, would you like to add to that what Rekha ji just added?
Well, having been part of the literate world all my life, and I'm a fifth generation literate person in English, so that is a different kind of privilege that I come from. Very aware of it, and I feel, of course, like those of us who grow with privilege, but also understand it, with some sensitivity. We feel that privilege ought to be shared with everybody. And this is a privilege that everyone must have. So as a person in education, for me, therefore, my whole life is about adding to the whole corpus of literacy in different ways. As a result of it, though, it's also made me think about why is it that we have been trying so hard for literacy, and for some reason we are not succeeding. And as a researcher, my vocation is to ask questions outside the box and to see what is it that we are doing that must be wrong in terms of maybe framing the problem itself. One of my most wonderful teachers taught us that if you ask the wrong questions, you're not going to get the right answers. And so what that I've been thinking about now for about 20 years is, what is it that is about our education system that we're not able to draw people into it? And one of the things that's also my research that I've done about knowledge systems, as you referred to earlier, that has made me think that many of the people we think are illiterate are not people who don't have knowledge. They have a lot of knowledge. And what we have done is created worlds of knowledge in which a certain kind of literacy is privileged. And those that do not have that privilege fall outside all the privileges that come with the literacy. So the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, as the English put it, those of us who acquire that, all the privilege that goes with it, that if you have degrees, then you have certain kinds of jobs. Those are jobs that pay well. If you're paid well, you can live a good life, you can have a home, you can have insurance, you can have health benefits. So we've constructed a whole society which rests on a particular notion of literacy. And we think that we've done very well for ourselves, and in a certain sense, we are right. And so this whole notion of progress, development, etc., which we have acquired, rests entirely on that.
Absolutely.
But what we need to think deeply is that there are things outside of that, and there's knowledge outside of literacy. So I'm trying to put a counterpoint to that, which Rekha ji is putting, but which is not opposed to it. It's a complementary point. And
Right.
that's where I would like to begin the discussion.
Right. It's very important that this idea that literacy just does not include the knowledge that is in their books, but it's also the knowledge that you gain from your surroundings, that you gain from your environment, so to speak. And it's also knowledge-based approach to literacy, which is very, very important. So kicking off this discussion with that particular point, let's first delve into the idea of what are the consequences that a mass essentially or a population essentially faces because of illiteracy. Rekha ji, we'd like to start with your opinions on that. What do you think would be the consequences of illiteracy on a population that big in a society?
So like ma'am said, we take literacy at a very narrow level, and many of us take it as only as reading and writing. But sometimes it's not as simple as it sounds. And she gave a very good example of knowledge and literacy, which we see that people have so much knowledge. Within India itself, we have many Indias. So every culture makes a different, every city makes a difference. Everything makes a difference, you know. So when we are looking at literacy per se, we really need to actually focus on what we are talking about. What literacy meant when we were growing up was reading and writing. And it seemed like if you knew to read and you knew to write, you are a literate person. Today, with the digital world, a person who may know to read a newspaper and actually not know to Google the information or the news is also labeled as illiterate. So sometimes I again question myself that as an educationist, what is it that I'm talking about? Am I talking about the printed material? Am I talking about the basic reading, writing of names that we are talking about? So I feel it is a complex subject and a topic, and we might struggle to get one definite answers. And like I said, within India, it is different cultures that is existing. So what may suit one person, because I know a lot of people who feel that knowing English is being literate, but we internally and we as Indians know that is not what it is, because we are full of villages and towns where literacy is there in their language, you know. So again, when we are talking of such a vast subject, we need to understand what literacy means. Does it mean skill literacy also? Are we taking that into account, or we are talking about reading, writing, digital literacy? So I would say that in today's 2023, the meaning is very, very different for us. And that is how the companies and the schools also are talking about different things. Because if it's coming to just reading and writing, I think we can achieve that very fast. But like ma'am said, that why we have not achieved so far even is a big question. So I can say we can have a program called Each One Teach One, and we can get all our students to teach one person who doesn't know to read and write. But is that our focus? What exactly, as of today, we mean? I think we should speak about that too.
That's true. Madhulika ma'am, as Rekha ji just said about, even if you know English, you don't become literate as much. Even if you know certain languages, you don't become sort of literate or educated. Do you think this points towards a certain sense of downwards growth, which means that people are growing across age or, people in general, the population is growing, but the growth is happening downwards because of what illiteracy is giving as a consequence? What do you think about that?
It's a very moot question, but it's a large question. So to answer it quickly is difficult. See, the difficulty is, what do we mean by growing downwards, growth downwards? We have certain parameters that we insist on calling development. And when we don't acquire them, then we feel that we are not developing enough. My perspective is that we really need to think about these parameters ourselves already. So let me give a very simple example, that we think that if you get water out of a tap and you don't have to go and fetch it from a well, then you are developed. Right? A simple example. Now, what have we done with this understanding that everybody must get piped water? Believe me, I'm not against piped water. But what has happened as a result of this imperative of piped water, which is a part of the way in which we have been literate and grown to understand what it is meant to be educated? What does it mean to live a certain kind of life that education gives you? In that, what we have completely lost is that the source of water is something that is everybody's responsibility and that we need to nurture them. And you'll say, God, what's the link? Now, we think that, therefore, it is the government's responsibility. Pani kahan se aayega? That's their job. They have to put it in pipes and send it to us. That's all. That's, of course, our meaning of great democracy as well, right? You elect your representatives, then it's their job. You look at how water was available to people. We used to think that people earlier were backward because they had to get water out of a well. So that's one aspect. But what did they do? Every place in the world, and if we don't need to go outside of India to even understand, every place had water bodies. Water bodies were either naturally available or people created them and then accessed them for water. And there were always separate water bodies for animals. There were separate water bodies for human beings. And yes, in that there was huge exploitation. Women had to go and get the water, it told on their health, etc. So that was a negative aspect. But what was the positive aspect? That these water bodies were seen as everybody's responsibility. Everybody had to keep them clean. People didn't put trash in them. There were temples built around them so that people understood that this was a sacrosanct place. Water was sacrosanct. That was part of the knowledge of people. And you see, there's a beautiful book by Anupam Mishra called Rajasthan Ki Rajat Boonde, which documents how people all over Rajasthan, which is a desert area, built beautiful water bodies and were water self-sufficient. Now, this is a huge knowledge and understanding about water, which not only made water available in the present to all communities and people, but understood that water bodies are natural aquifers that keep water for posterity. And this is very, very important knowledge that all children, all generations acquired and maintained. Just give me 1 second. So this is, a kind of, which was the knowledge of people. Now, in this, I would say that, yes, one aspect of this, which was that women had to fetch water, etc., that was bad. That definitely, when we have challenged and modern ideas have come, people have thought, no, this is one aspect that's wrong and we need to do something about it. But whether piped water is the only solution for that, we don't know. And whether there can be other. Now, what happens with literacy? Because literacy, as Rekha ji said very aptly, it's not just about reading and writing. It's about a whole body of knowledge, right? That comes with a certain kind of training. Many of these things are very, very important, very good, no doubt about it. But what is important to understand about forms of literacy is also that there is a certain frame in which this literacy comes to us. Now, this frame makes us think about solutions, about problems, all in particular ways. So the advanced way of accessing water is through piped water, is to have flush toilets. So we need to recognize the limitations of that frame of literacy as well. And therefore, I think that when we evaluate ourselves in terms of whether we are, growing downwards or upwards, there are so many of these parameters that need to be questioned, that need to be challenged. And unfortunately, what happens is that the problem with celebrating World Literacy Day is this, that, when you celebrate, now someone like myself who's a professor in university can't say I won't celebrate. But the problem is that there is no scope in this World Literacy Day to question the parameters of literacy and to say that there are certain problems. You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you need to recognize that if there are problems with this framework of literacy,
Right.
then we need to do something about it. Celebration is not good enough.
Right, right. Rekha ma'am, on this celebration, very interesting point pointed out by Madhulika ji that while this celebration is happening, we're not looking at the parameters of literacy, right? That is, so one reason for that could simply be that, there hasn't been a strong focus as much on something called literacy for everybody or something called literacy for everyone. Because when we talk of these parameters also for literacy, the idea of, oh, everybody needs to be literate comes into picture. Where do you place the onus of that idea of literacy for everyone with regards to achieving a better society or with regards to, achieving a better status quo, for example?
I place the onus on the individual,
On the individual.
not on anyone else. I
Right.
always say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. The point is, again, like a double-edged sword. We blame each other. So the schools will say we have dropouts, we don't have children coming. There are lots of children who say we want education, but are not getting the best of education and things like that. So I feel if we come to the government last. But there are lots of policies, believe me, there are lots of parameters done by individuals, by social workers and all that say that this is what we need, this is what it should be done and it should be achieved. Even the government gives us all that. But like ma'am said, that exactly what we need to focus on, we do not have that clarity, you know. So individually, I always feel, I'll give a very simple example. When I did my B.Ed, and we were told to choose an area where children were not going to school. And I chose my area only. I live in a suburb of Mumbai called Khar. I live on the west side. And on the east side, I noticed there were a lot of children and they were not going to school. And my college provided me with the kits which was given by the government of India of each one teach one. We used to go from door to door asking kids whether they would like to study. And when I'm talking of literacy here at this point, I would say during those visits from door to door, I came up and realized that adults were not literate. So in my school, we run 2 shifts. We run 7 to 1 and 1 to 6. At 1 o'clock, I started running the adult education class. And literacy started, but they did not want to learn Hindi, Marathi. They wanted to learn English. So, because their children went to English medium school, so they wanted to be on par with that. And what started by my principal as like, you know, go and see what is the literacy rate in that locality, the period 1990 for the next 10 years, 12 years, our school and we could educate the entire of Khar East, Santa Cruz East and Bandra East. We would go there and say, y'all don't get admission in other schools. Come, we will give you admission, but come. When they were not coming, we would send teachers home. And literacy also helped in the overall family development. It just saw that, you know what happened? Why aren't you wearing a pair of footwear? They had it, but they were not wearing. So from literacy, it became education. And it was like intermingled. So we were educating also and focusing on literacy also. So I personally feel we have enough educated people, enough literate people to look individually into the illiterate people. But Absolutely. They should want to be literate. We cannot just keep on blaming each other for it. And like I always say, if you want, I have 2,000 children, each child can go and educate five people in the country. But we need to want to do it. So I put the onus on us as individual, as a group.
And this onus of wanting to learn also, I think, is very important in adults as well, as you mentioned, because adults act as the mediators between children and also older generations, right?
Yes. And I tell you, it built up a lot of values in there because these women were coming in burqas, they were coming in different attires. They learned how to dress up. They went home and spoke. They learned to sign their name. The biggest joy it got them, you know, it was a different world altogether. This we can discuss.
Madhulika ji, I want to come to you and get your opinions on this idea of adult literacy, because so far we've been discussing literacy for children rather. But in, say, developing countries like India or even third world countries like Pakistan or even, you know, China, there are a lot of adults who are illiterate. There is a lot of adult illiteracy problems happening, solutions being found. Where do you see that heading towards?
You know, frankly, I think that if adults are not literate, one of the things that we need to do, I agree with Rekha ji, blame game is not any solution at all. But I do think that I think those of us who become literate and educated assume that those who are not are unfortunate, that they don't have what we do. Partly that is true, they are unfortunate. But I think, like all policy, it's not only about literacy, but all policy. I think those of us who make policy assume that we know all the answers. And we don't think that it might be pertinent to ask adults why they are not literate. Or would they like to be literate? And as she herself pointed out, that when she asked them, I mean, when they were offered lessons, they all wanted to learn English. Not only because, I mean, she said that it was because they wanted to be at par with their children. Absolutely. I mean, that is my understanding as well. At the same time, you know, as a political scientist, I want to also bring in my little understanding from my discipline that English is the language of power in this country. In all post-colonial countries and now in many other, even in Europe, it is now becoming the language of power. And so if we understand that, it's when people, and you know, power doesn't mean that tomorrow you're going to become the, not what power is. As a student of politics, the way we teach power is that it resides in all layers of society. At every layer of society, people have an understanding of what it means to have power. English is a means of accessing power in different ways. As she said, you can sign your name, you can read documents, you can open a bank account on your own. You know, there are numerous small things which give people a great sense of power. But people may want more than that. They may want something different than that. So earlier she talked about skilling. And I would say that, you know, if you can be a good electrician, you don't need to learn English. I have a friend who's an electrical engineer. He came to stay with us once. And then the power went. This is the days before we had an inverter. And then he said, okay, let's go down. And so we said, hey, come on. Here, you electrical engineer, come on, let's look at, and do you want to see if there's something wrong with the box? And so he looked at it and he said, he put some wires right and it worked. And we were so excited that, oh, wow, you've really lived up to your degree. He said, no, I didn't learn this in IIT, where I studied electrical engineering. The linesman in my department taught me how to fix wires, you know. So I think that if adults are illiterate, why they might have even shunned it at some point. क्या होगा पढ़ लिख के हाथ से कुछ काम सीखो. I hope it's okay to lapse into Hindi occasionally. Yeah. So हाथ से कुछ काम सीखो. If you can do something, you know, then that will still earn you well. They know that you will earn better if you also learn how to read and write. But for them, they would not have the privilege or the space in which they could have learned both a skill as well as, you know, for them at that time, literacy is a luxury. Also, I think that this is for everything. We need to ask people, what is it that they think about literacy? What is it that they would like to learn? Often what happens is when we offer them a package, it's not attractive to them. And we cannot understand how we, as superior beings, literate beings, offering something, can be judged by them as to whether they want it or not. They, of course, should be very excited if we offer them something. So I think that it's a complex thing. And like every policy, adult literacy is something that really, really needs to be understood better. And if we do it the way people need it, the way people want it, we are likely to have much more success. You know, and also not to speak of the fact, I'm sure Rekha ji knows much better about this than I do, that the manner in which we teach, the you know, systems of learning are so boring and so unattractive. Why would anyone want to study? Why would anyone want to be literate? बहुत boring है. इससे तो अच्छा है कि माने if we devise other ways of learning. Oh, लोग teacher training करते हैं, सब कुछ करते हैं उसमें, you know, all kinds of forms they are expected to do, projects, etc. Once you come into a school, the minute you start teaching, then it's the same old format. And the people who offer exceptions are often the people who get into trouble with their peers and sometimes with their seniors also. This is equally true at university. Of course, for university, the even worse thing is nobody teaches us how to teach. Everybody assumes कि MA pass कर लिया, PhD कर रहे हो तो पढ़ाना आता ही होगा, which is absolute nonsense. Nobody taught me how to teach. I have learned on the job. So when I try to innovate, the first people who resisted my innovations were my peers and my seniors. तुमको क्या लगता है, तुम कुछ क्या कर लोगी करके. So to make learning attractive is not considered to be a priority at all. So there are many dimensions to this, I think, that we need to think.
Rekha ji, just detouring this discussion, since Madhulika ji mentioned about the boredom of school education, or the rather boredom of rote learning, I'd call it. Do you have any examples or any experiences from your experience, or like my career, where you've realized that, okay, school education or literacy at large has become this boring concept that has just been conditioned to us? Do you think you can remember any?
Oh, I have plenty of them.
I'm
But
sure.
but
Yeah.
one thing I have to say, Ashutosh, I'm not against rote learning at all. A simple example is my tables. If I didn't do rote learning, I wouldn't know my tables like this. I would still go to the calculator and do it. One. Second, if I didn't know my poems well, I wouldn't be able to quote the poems. I think today, when we recite the Tennyson or the Daffodils, William Wordsworth, and other Shakespeare dialogues without, thinking, or a book, I think rote memory did help me. But yes, believe me, no one, like ma'am said, why would kids want to come to school if you can't make your education interesting? And like I always say the example that you ask a maths teacher teach maths through music, and he cannot even fathom that. How can you do that? And
Exactly.
because I hated studies, but I loved school, was because of certain things. And I had that advantage that where I went as a student from nursery school and graduated from there, I went there back as a teacher and a principal. So I used to be like a real Nautanki educator, I would say. So in the 10th standard, which I feel has had maths and science and are like in their local language, totally pakaued and bored, I would take balloons and go, and they would say, God, now what is she up to? She's taking balloons in the 10th standard class where they're supposed to be preparing for prelims and all. I tell you, it makes a difference. Absolutely. That 5 minutes
Absolutely.
of a storytelling by a teacher can get you the children literate, educate forever. So my period is of 35 minutes. My 5 minutes would be of all this Nautanki, 5 minutes of story, and 5 minutes of silence time, which is mandatory. And when I was a teacher, the principal came, who came, I don't care. When I became the principal, I was having my silent time, and the education inspector could also wait out because I need to work on myself and during my working hours. So when those adult education ladies came, my school was 1 o'clock one session, till 1 o'clock, and then 1 o'clock primary starts. So they start with prayer. We don't care which community you belong to. We say the multi-faith prayer, every day different prayer. And parents could go on the mic and say, Apne dharam se. For me, that was reaching literacy to the core and to the forefront, So I can go on, Ashutosh, but that would be taking into your time.
No. This reminds me of also, like, we're reaching towards almost the conclusion of this discussion. But this reminds me of a very important aspect here of the alternative methods of literacy, and of the additional things that we could do with literacy, right? First things first, and the most important question that we would like to discuss, I think, is how do you see the solution of illiteracy, or the extension or escalation of literacy for that matter, through softer measures like compassion, kindness, empathy? Rekha ji, we'll start with you, then we'll move to Madhulika ma'am.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it is a very simple thing. Like I said, I like my school, but I wanted to go there because of masti rather than studies. So you have programs. I know a lot of schools are having it, but the program that I run, thanks to my trust called Public Concern for Governance Run, PCGT, is a program called Kuch Aur. besides academics, something else. And we used to run it only for higher classes till all the schools started demanding it for even classes that were not included. And your aidbees has been a part of kindness program, and we have been spreading. Basically, you know what? Like I said, in your day-to-day curriculum, you have to understand that our children are coming from different cultures, different backgrounds. Somehow, we as educators forget that. Background, when I mean the economic structure also. In the classroom, there are people who are less privileged, and there are the students who are really privileged. Are we focusing and talking on both levels? As a teacher, we just talk and just get out. We don't understand why the person. This is the privileged part of it. Even academic wise, there are people who are dyslexic or they are facing some problem, or a night that a child has not had very good in the house, whether it's the parents fighting or whether it's a late night dinner or whatever. There are so many things that are putting together. And that's where your quiet time and introspection and reflection helps. So it's for teachers also, it's for the principal also, for me also, and including the peer.
Yeah.
So that time we give a topic, suppose we say, today topic is forgiveness. Did I forgive myself? Did I forget my peers who bullied me? Did I forgive my parents who did not pay the fees on time? And, things like that. And when we tell them a topic or an issue to forgive about. So when we are talking of environment, Ashutosh, we are talking of the political environment in the country too, with the children and the teachers, because we let that affect us so much, which does come in our way of daily life. So it real reflection, introspection, dialogues, interaction has helped us a lot. And one more thing, last, listening. So in my side, when I have a paper or a board or a document, my side, it says, listen. You may be the principal, you may be an adult, but find the time to listen to the opposite person. That has really helped us.
Wow.
Full stop.
Madhulika ji, would you like to continue that idea of kindness and empathy for schools and education?
Sure. I'd like to begin by expressing my deep appreciation for Rekha ji's methods. And I really wish someone had taught me about quiet time as a child. It's a fabulous idea to have institutionalized. A lot of people do it individually, but to do it institutionally is remarkable. I'm going to talk about this a lot to anyone who will care to listen. Thank you very much. I've really learned something from you today. But extending the idea of compassion, I think it's so important. And I'm so glad that you are foregrounding it, Ashutosh, in your work. I like the way you describe your work, your organization's work. Is so, so important. And let me do a kind of complementary idea to what Rekha ji is talking about. When we talk about teaching children, this listening, this last point is so important. As a parent, I've learned to listen is so important. Most teachers go in there thinking, we are here to impart wisdom. If you listen to children, how much you can learn. Amazing. And I think all classrooms should have this listening time. And, teachers can do it if there are 30 students in a class. So if 2 students get a chance every day, so every 15th day, you will get a chance. So you can think, अच्छा मुझे ये कहना है class में. बहुत सारी चीजें निकलती हैं. And I think that's so, so valuable. The other is that, children know a few things. When we talk about adult education, if we want adult literacy, one of the things is when we call adults in, we ask them, what is it that you think you know?
Right.
So if a carpenter is coming for an adult literacy class, there are not many women carpenters, but men can teach you a thing or two about math because they are calculating all the time. You ask a plumber, they will teach you the physics of surfaces.
That skill development is essentially very, very important.
No. Ashutosh, don't call it skill development.
Okay.
Because skill development is like we are trying to develop their skills. No, I'm saying they already have a skill. When they're coming for literacy, ask them what is it that they already know, which hasn't come through the routine route of literacy that you and I have had. They've
Right.
learned it differently. And that way of knowing, a different way of knowing, yields a different kind of knowledge. So if we were to ask them what they know, simple, my friends who are teaching in Madhya Pradesh, in a village, ask the children, okay, so what are the trees that you see when you come? They named 108 different kinds of trees.
Wow.
How many do you know? I know like 5, not more than that.
Thank you.
But when you ask a child the names of trees, can you imagine how empowered they will feel? I hate this word, but how powerful they will feel. That अच्छा मुझे आते 108 नाम आते हैं जो मेरे टीचर को नहीं आता है.
Absolutely.
So compassion comes out of acknowledging what the other knows.
Right.
And expressing your respect for it. This is very important. And
That's
the
very
minute you begin to listen and the minute you begin to express your respect for another's knowledge, you have already gone 3 steps, in compassion towards that person. That's very important.
That's absolutely an important point. And I think that the idea that compassion comes from acknowledgement, listening, and also receiving a lot of what you gain from the world around is very,
Yeah,
very
yeah,
important.
yeah.
We've had a very, very wonderful discussion around literacy, the milestones that we've achieved so far, and also how empathy, compassion, and all the softer skills are so important for, upgrading and escalating education systems. Before we wrap this up, I would like to know your closing thoughts to our audiences for International Literacy Day. We'll start with Rekha ji, and then we'll move to Madhulika ji, and then we'll wrap it up. What would you like to tell our audiences now?
Well, for our country, I would say democracy in India will be meaningful and inclusive when illiteracy is properly addressed through policy initiatives and adequate funding. And then we have achieved what we want.
Madhulika ma'am, what would you like to add to that?
And well, unlike a political scientist, I would like to speak like a teacher and as a mother, as a parent. I think that in our efforts to literacy, one of the things, people talk a lot about mental health these days, but we have a separate mental health awareness week and we have a separate literacy week. And I think the two really need to be. I'm so happy Rekha ji talked about other kinds of problems like dyslexia, she mentioned. Now we understand that children have a range of issues and that every child is different. I love this idea that the idea of neurodiversity. So literacy needs to recognize neurodiversity. It's very important. The minute we begin to become at least sensitive to the idea that there is neurodiversity, so therefore, if a child is not doing what you want, they are not just being truant, but they must be different. And that is the teacher's duty is to try and understand that difference rather than to condemn it or to straitjacket them, which is basically, understanding neurodiversity helps us to do. So if we can bring the two things together, neurodiversity and literacy, it's a win-win situation.
That's a very, very inspiring and motivating point to close the discussion at. We've had a wonderful chat with both of you. And I want to thank both of you, Rekha Shahani ma'am and Madhulika Banerjee ma'am, for being here. I want to thank all our audiences for joining in. And this was a very well-sorted discussion on the World Literacy Day. We hope that illiteracy gets combated with initiatives like kindness, with initiatives like empathy. And when it comes to kindness, you all know aidbees is always there to spread kindness, practice kindness, and make the world into a kinder place. Keep following this space, keep watching. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in.
Thank you so much, too. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
The recording